Welcome to Life Stories, where we share powerful tales of resilience, transformation, and triumph. Today's story is about Grace, a quiet librarian who was overlooked and underestimated, until betrayal pushed her to reveal a side no one saw coming. When her husband left her for a more ambitious woman, Grace didn't just move on, she took over his entire company. What unfolds is a journey of strength, determination, and poetic justice that proves sometimes the quietest people hold the most power. Subscribe to our channel to hear Grace's incredible story and more inspiring tales like this one. Let's begin. Grace Mitchell had always prided herself on being the steady one, the woman who kept her feet firmly planted on the ground while the world spun around her. At 35, she had built a life filled with quiet routines and comforting predictability. As a librarian at the University of Chicago Library for over a decade, she found solace in the whispering pages of old books and the gentle hum of study lamps glowing late into the evening. To her, the library was not just a workplace but a sanctuary, a place where stories lived and breathed through the shelves. That evening, as the sun dipped below the city skyline, Grace was meticulously cataloging a set of rare first editions that had just arrived. Her hands moved with practiced ease, the smell of aged paper soothing her nerves. When her phone vibrated softly on the desk, she glanced at it without much thought. But her breath caught when she saw Brian's name flashing on the screen. It wasn't like him to text during work hours. When she opened the message, her heart seemed to freeze, every beat slowing to a painful thud. Grace, this isn't working anymore. I need someone who matches my ambition. A librarian can't give me the lifestyle I deserve. I've already moved my things out. Grace stared at the words, trying to make sense of them. It felt as if the ground beneath her feet had given way, sending her spiraling into an endless abyss. She didn't cry, didn't shout, didn't even move. Instead, she finished cataloging the book in her hand, placing it carefully on the shelf. A group of eager freshman students approached her, asking for help with research materials, and Grace managed a gentle smile as she guided them to the right section. Not a single crack in her calm demeanor, not a hint of the storm raging inside her. Only when she was alone did she let herself breathe out. Slowly and deliberately, she typed a simple reply. Good luck with your new life, Brian. It wasn't like she hadn't seen it coming. For months, there had been signs, small but unmistakable hints of Brian's betrayal. The late nights at the office that never seemed to add up. The sudden wardrobe upgrade to tailored suits and silk ties. The distant look in his eyes whenever they talked about the future. The real blow had come 3 months prior when she'd found the dinner receipt tucked into his jacket pocket. $400 for two at Lurk's Bistro on a night he'd sworn he was working late. Grace hadn't confronted him immediately. Instead, she'd taken a deep breath and called a number she'd memorized long ago. Mr. Daniels, she'd said evenly, the acquisition can proceed. Just keep my name off all paperwork for now. Because what Brian never knew, never bothered to ask or care about, was that Grace Mitchell was more than just a librarian. She was the hidden force behind Mitchell Holdings, a multi-billion-dollar investment firm that her family had quietly managed for generations. Working at the library was her way of staying grounded, of escaping the relentless pressure of high finance and power. She had built her own life with purpose and humility, and Brian had never questioned it. He had simply assumed that their comfortable lifestyle came from her librarian salary, never once considering that the woman who shelved books by day could be orchestrating massive acquisitions by night. Grace didn't need his ambition or his flashy ideas. She had her own power, one he had never seen because he was too busy looking for something more dazzling. The day after his text, Brian sent another message, smug and patronizing. Don't worry about the house payments. Rachel makes enough as a corporate executive to cover them. You should try getting a real job someday. Rachel. Grace remembered her from a gala hosted by the Chamber of Commerce last year. A tall, striking woman with impeccable taste and a loud, tinkling laugh that had grated on Grace's nerves. She remembered how Rachel had lingered too close to Brian, touching his arm, flashing smiles just a little too warm. Grace had known, even then, that there was something more than professionalism between them. It hurt. Of course it did. But Grace wasn't about to let pain consume her. She was raised to believe that dignity was worth more than pride. That strength came from facing betrayal with grace. As she sat alone in the quiet of her small office, she called Simon, her lawyer. "It's time," she said softly. "Start phase 1. The papers are ready," Simon replied calmly, "and the acquisition is complete as of this morning. Brian has no idea he's been working for you for the past month." Grace smiled to herself, allowing the tiniest hint of satisfaction to settle into her chest. Let him play his games and bask in his ambition. Soon, he would learn that ambition without integrity was nothing but a hollow pursuit. Her phone chimed with another message. But Grace didn't bother to check it. Instead, she turned back to her books, running her fingers gently along the spine of an old classic. She would handle this the way she handled everything, with quiet resolve and unwavering strength. After all, she knew that true power didn't need to be loud to be felt. Days turned into weeks, and Grace maintained her composed routine, never allowing herself to appear anything less than poised and graceful. She knew that the world around her was watching, colleagues who whispered about her newfound singleness and friends who offered sympathetic looks while carefully avoiding the subject. Grace simply smiled, nodded, and continued on as if nothing had changed. But beneath that calm exterior, she was strategizing. Phase 1 had been set into motion, and the gears were turning exactly as planned. Brian, still blissfully unaware that the company he now worked for was owned by his ex-girlfriend, continued to boast about his new life on social media. Pictures of him and Rachel at lavish events flooded his profile, flaunting his newfound status. Grace couldn't help but notice how forced his smile looked, how his eyes didn't quite match the confident facade he tried to project. One evening, as Grace was sipping tea in her cozy apartment, Simon called. His voice was calm but carried a hint of satisfaction. "It's done," he said simply. Grace didn't need any further explanation. She knew that the quiet acquisition of the real estate firm where Brian worked was finalized. The ownership documents were now neatly filed under Mitchell Holdings, and Brian's department would soon face a significant restructuring. Simon hesitated before adding, "You sure you don't want him fired outright?" "No," Grace replied firmly. "I want him to earn his way back up. Let him prove his worth, if he can. That's his punishment. Pride without substance always crumbles." That night, Grace found herself reflecting on the choices she had made, not just about Brian, but about her own life. She had once believed that humility was the cornerstone of love, that simplicity in a relationship could withstand anything. Yet, as she stared at the city lights stretching beyond her window, she realized how she had allowed herself to be small, to be overlooked. Brian's ambition had overshadowed her own, not because he was more driven, but because she had chosen to stay in the background, protecting her peace rather than asserting her power. The next morning, she dressed with a deliberate elegance, a soft blue dress that brought out the vivid clarity of her eyes and a pair of understated pearl earrings. Her hair, usually pulled back in a practical bun, now cascaded loosely over her shoulders. As she walked into the library, heads turned, not because of her outfit, but because of the quiet confidence emanating from her. At lunch, she met with Claire, an old friend who had always seen through Grace's reserved exterior. "You look different," Claire noted, arching an eyebrow. "Confident, empowered." Grace gave a soft laugh. "Maybe I've just decided to stop hiding." Claire smiled knowingly. "About time. You were never meant to be in anyone's shadow." As the days passed, Grace found herself reinvesting in her own happiness. She took up an evening art class, something she had long admired but never pursued. She joined a community book club that challenged her reading tastes, and even agreed to go hiking with Claire one Saturday morning, a decision she regretted halfway up the steep trail but cherished afterward. Feeling the exhilaration of accomplishment, though she tried not to dwell on it, she knew the next phase was approaching. Brian was on the brink of discovering the truth. and she wasn't sure how he would react. It wasn't about revenge, at least not entirely. It was about setting things right. About showing him that love wasn't meant to be transactional or tied to status. It was about teaching him that true success wasn't about stepping on others to climb higher. One evening, as she was sketching a landscape from her hike, Simon called again, his tone grave. "There's a problem," he said. "Brian's team just found out about the acquisition. He's panicking." Grace took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Let him panic," she said firmly. "Sometimes, the only way to learn is to face the consequences head-on." She hung up, letting the weight of the moment settle over her. She knew this wasn't the end, but it was a turning point. Whatever came next, she would meet it with the same grace and resolve that had guided her through the storm. She was done being the quiet, invisible woman in someone else's story. Now, it was time to write her own. 2 weeks later, the day Grace had been anticipating finally arrived. Vance & Company was buzzing with excitement and tension. The news of the acquisition had rippled through the office like a sudden storm. And employees were on edge, speculating about what changes the new ownership might bring. Brian, however, remained oddly confident, certain that his recent promotion would shield him from any fallout. Grace watched from a distance, choosing not to make her presence known just yet. Instead, she focused on ensuring that the company's restructuring plan was solid and fair. She wasn't interested in tearing down what others had built, only in transforming it into something stronger and more resilient. The whispers from the office grapevine indicated that Brian had been bragging about his secured position, dismissing any fears of layoffs as irrelevant to someone of his stature. It was almost poetic, how unaware he was of what was coming. Grace wasn't one to delight in another person's downfall, but this wasn't about ruining him. It was about holding him accountable. She knew that sometimes lessons needed to be learned the hard way. When the announcement was made that the new owner would be addressing the staff, curiosity reached a fever pitch. Employees crowded into the conference room, murmuring amongst themselves as they awaited the arrival of the mysterious new executive. Brian stood near the front, his shoulders squared with the confidence of someone certain he'd be recognized and praised. When Grace walked in, the room fell silent. For a moment, disbelief hung thick in the air, and Brian's face drained of color. Grace moved with poise, her steps unhurried, projecting the quiet strength she had cultivated over the years. Taking her place at the head of the table, she offered a calm, composed smile to the gathered team. "Good morning," she began, her voice even and clear. "As most of you have probably heard by now, Mitchell Holdings has acquired Vance & Co. I am Grace Mitchell, the new owner." A ripple of shock moved through the room, and Brian looked like he was struggling to process what he was seeing and hearing. Grace didn't give him time to interject. Instead, she continued smoothly, "I know that transitions can be challenging, and I want to assure all of you that my goal is not to disrupt what works well, but to build upon it. We will be implementing some changes, primarily focused on improving operational efficiency and fostering a more collaborative corporate culture. Rest assured, we value the contributions of our dedicated employees." She paused, her gaze briefly meeting Brian's. He was staring at her with a mix of disbelief and anger. His hands clenched at his sides. Ignoring his glare, she carried on. "As we move forward, I encourage openness and transparency. My door will always be open for those who have ideas to share or concerns to raise. The strength of this company lies in its people, and I intend to make sure that talent and hard work are rewarded fairly." When she concluded, there was a murmur of cautious optimism from the staff. They seemed encouraged by her composed, respectful approach. Grace gave them a reassuring nod before dismissing the meeting, noting the way Brian remained rooted to his spot, too stunned to move. Once the room had cleared, he finally found his voice, low and trembling with fury. "What is this, Grace? Some kind of sick joke?" She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "No joke, Brian, just business." He took a step closer, his jaw clenched. "You lied to me. You let me believe you were just some meek little librarian, struggling to keep up with me. All this time, you were hiding this? Grace tilted her head, her voice calm and unwavering. I never lied. You just never cared enough to see beyond what you wanted me to be. Brian's face contorted with frustration. But before he could respond, Simon entered the room, giving Grace a nod. Everything set for the executive review. He informed her. Thank you, Simon, she replied, turning back to Brian. You should prepare. Your department's performance is being evaluated today. He stared at her, still trying to comprehend the reality of the situation. Grace didn't bother waiting for him to process it. She had work to do. And there was no time to coddle a man who never saw her worth until it was too late. As she walked away, she couldn't help but feel a profound sense of liberation. She had faced him, not with anger or spite, but with strength and dignity. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming herself. Weeks passed, and Grace settled into her role as the owner of Vance & Company, transforming the company culture with integrity and purpose. The toxic remnants of the old regime faded away as employees found themselves inspired by her leadership, one that valued hard work, honesty, and collaboration. Brian, now relegated to a lower-level position far from the executive suite, remained a shadow of his former self. He avoided Grace in the halls, unable to reconcile the powerful, confident woman she had become with the quiet librarian he once dismissed. Grace didn't hold on to bitterness. Instead, she focused on building the company into something worthy of pride, a legacy not defined by status but by substance. One afternoon, while reviewing new project proposals, Grace glanced out the window, reflecting on how far she had come. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every challenge. She realized that true strength wasn't just about success or power. It was about embracing one's own value, even when others failed to see it. Later that evening, as she left the office, her phone buzzed with a message from an old friend who had just heard the news. Proud of you, Grace. You always were stronger than anyone knew. Smiling, Grace locked her phone and walked into the crisp evening air. The city lights flickered with possibilities. And for the first time in a long while, she felt completely at peace. She didn't need validation or approval from anyone else. She had proven to herself that she was more than capable of thriving on her own terms. As she moved forward, Grace knew her story wasn't just about reclaiming her power. It was about never underestimating the quiet strength that lies within. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more inspirational tales of triumph and resilience. See you in the next video.